this is a two-part lecture, or I would say two-part module, in which I will discuss applications of perturbation theory in some problems. It's unlikely that I will fully solve any of these problems, but I will give an outline of how to solve and what are the class of problems you should be solving, at least you should be solving, in order to cover the bare minimum expectation from a UG level or master's level course. So the most typical textbook example problems in a master's level course is these three class of problems. One is particle in a box, which is 1D, 2D or 3D. Another is harmonic oscillator, again 1D, 2D or 3D. And the third class is particle in a central potential, like hydrogen atom, or more complex example like helium atom. So you have solved all of these problems in great detail in previous semester. At this time now we will see if we complicate this problem with some perturbation or some part which is not so simply solvable, and that will constitute the examples of perturbation theory. So broadly, if you gain expertise on solving these various varieties of this problem, which are spread across these various standard textbook of Griffiths, Sakurai, Landau, Cohen-Tanuzzi, Shankar, Lebov, Marchbecker and all that, so on. If you know how to solve or know the basic strategy of this kind of problems, then you are all set for all the expectations which one have from this course. Okay, so now there is a small table to describe this class of problems. So the first I put the name of the kind of problems, second the description, third is the Hamiltonian, how the Hamiltonian look like. So the particle in a box class has, you can make it complicated in infinitely many ways of course, but the most common thing you will find in example problems are when the floor of the box is uneven, like there is a small bump, or like there is a delta function, or the small hole the floor is sinusoidal or tilted or so on. It can be anything. Or you can have a different box, or like inside the box you have some distorted boundary conditions, like the floor of the box is lifted in one side, or the boundary is not just a vertical wall, it could be a slanted wall or something. So these are like imperfect box examples, and its Hamiltonian will have the part which is H0 part, which is p square by 2m with the boundary condition of the simple square box or rectangular box, plus the unusual problem, or the problem which is hard to solve, like a distorted floor or whatever it is. We will see a lot of examples of that. The another type we will see this example, you will see it in the various books and exercises, is anharmonic oscillator. You have solved anharmonic oscillator in classical mechanics. Here you will see that it's the same thing. You have a mass spring system where the spring is nonlinear. So the H0 is simply px square by 2m plus half k square, the harmonic oscillator, plus H1 is some nonlinear term. This is a famous problem actually. There are hundreds of papers were written on that. In perturbation theory, it was first solved in 1969, and what is interesting is that often in these box potential problems, you can often solve it exactly, although it is very complicated, but still you can solve it exactly in principle. And then people have still do perturbation theory, because sometimes it's easier to give you a reasonably good and quick answer. But these anharmonic oscillator problems are problems of the class which cannot be solved exactly, and you either do numerics, or you do, if you want an analytical or good enough answer analytically, you do perturbation theory. And they are experimentally very relevant. People prepare these ion trap experiments, people always create this kind of anharmonic potentials and all that. Or sometimes they are more useful to model solids, electrons in a solid, vibrational effects and all that. And both of these kind of problems have extremely wide range of practical applications. They are not just textbook problems. And then the third class of problem, which we will do in a separate video after this, it is the problem with central potential. So this class is very important. They are the they are the prime class over the last century. Like perturbation theory is extremely successful in describing a class of problems which are basically spectroscopic problem or atomic and molecular physics problem, and this is the triumph of, you can say, this is the triumph of perturbation theory. So what do you have here? You have the H naught, which is a, let's say, take the simplest possible problem, a single electron atom like hydrogen atom. H naught is that which you have solved in great detail. Now add perturbations which are not easy to deal with directly. So these are the various types of perturbation. First is the LS coupling. Is the coupling between orbital and spin angular momentum, which comes in the form of L dot S. So how to treat that in a perturbation theory we will see. I may or may not do this example, so you can look it up in the book, but what I will do is the Stark effect and Zeeman effect. So the Stark effect is something when you put an uniform electric field in a particular direction for a atom like that, hydrogen atom, and Zeeman effect is the same thing with a magnetic field. So the Stark effect couples with the electronic charge of the electron, and Zeeman effect couples with the total angular momentum, which is consists of orbital and spin angular momentum of the atom of the electron. Then there is another class of problems which are extremely relevant in solid state physics, which is a nearly free electron model. So normally we model a metal as an electron roaming inside a free electron, as if it's roaming like a gas particle inside a box, the box is the material, but it is of course not true. So the next order of approximation you can make, that there is the electron sees a potential which is due to other ions which are fixed and periodic. So the problem at next level of sophistication is electron in a periodic lattice, which leads to band structure and all that, and that can be solved using perturbation theory, using the part which is free electron p square by 2m plus the periodic lattice. Now this is there is a very interesting extension of this problem. Like you can treat this problem to solve this problem and show that if by changing the lattice spacing you can have a metal to insulator transition. Like at some point of time the electron wave function will stop to be plane wave like or delocalized, and it will become something localized. We will see if we have time, we will look at this problem. This is an extremely interesting example. This thing is called Pierce transition, and I suggest you to look it up into any solid state physics book. So by perturbation theory you can show that a metal can become an insulator can become metal by changing the lattice spacing, which can happen by an external pressure. Okay, so now let's jump into the examples. So here are all the varieties you will see in various books of this particle in a box problem. So see first the H naught. It is a particle in a box, a Vx potential which has an infinite wall at 0 and a. The x direction, it's one dimensional problem, and then you add a potential first by a small bump, like a small bump here. This is written in Griffith and many books and everywhere you will see, but it is actually, if you remember, I told you that sometimes you don't know exactly what is the problem, to be precise. So this could be one example. Like everywhere you will see the picture, but they don't write the problem always, because a bump can be modeled in different way. So for example, you can model this bump as a small Gaussian, or you can model it as a semicircle, or you can model it as some what will I say? So, you can model it as a small square. So different things will give you different answer, but you can see if it is small enough, qualitatively the answers are similar. So you can try this problem. Actually it's a very simple problem. You can just try, you can solve even it exactly, or you can use the first order perturbation theory and see that if different bumps, different type of functions you use to model this bump, how that changes the answer. Okay, that next problem is the easiest problem worked out in Griffith. I have not worked out, but shown in Griffith, maybe worked out also. So it is basically you add a constant shift of the bottom of the well or bottom of the potential by an amount V naught. it's a easy problem actually. You know what happens immediately, because if you just solve that problem, so all energy levels get shifted by V naught. But how can you get that from perturbation theory? So that is the problem basically. The third problem is a little more non-trivial, which says that, oh, you don't lift the entire float, you lift half of the float. How does it changes the energy levels and all that? The fourth problem and fifth problem has some interesting part. So think of the third problem, and instead of placing the 0 at the edge, you put the 0 at the middle, and then you say, oh, by the amount 1/4 of the distance, I lift the central, or I lift the float by amount V, both sides of the origin. And the fifth case, you lift it one side and suppress it another side. So these two are different, because in the first case, what you do is basically, you maintain the parity of the problem, or in other words, if the original problem has this symmetry that the potential at x is same as potential at minus x, in this problem that also happened, but in the fifth problem you break that. The potential at x is opposite to potential at minus x. What is the consequence of that? So the first case, it is both h naught and h1 commutes with parity operator, but in the fifth case they don't. So if you just blindly follow the formulas and calculate it, you will see that what kind of corrections you get in the fourth and fifth, and then you try to understand what is their structure as far as parity is concerned. So these are the interesting classes of problem you will encounter when you look at the exercises in the book. Now let me mention some important points to keep in mind when you solve this problem. The first is the validity of the solution, of course, which is the most important thing, and you know how to do that. You know that the validity is given by the ratio bit of the perturbation strength to the energy gap or of the levels. So that's the question, is basically what is the dimensionless ratio which must be small compared to 1 in order the perturbation to be meaningful. Now what happens to the symmetry of the problem, which is, as I mentioned in the problem 4 and 5, you can see what is the nature of the corrections. Is it a odd function or even function, or what kind of, which order corrections are more relevant. So by just twisting the problem a little bit, how much the answer changes, that is also something to wonder about. Now let me show the solution of the first problem, which is the rule always that I will show you how to cook rice, and then I will ask you to cook biryani, which is obvious extension. So as always, the example solved problems are always easy, and the problem you are asked to solve in exercises are always hard. That's what it appears when you do it first time. Okay, so what is this potential Vx? So we just shift it by a constant amount V naught, and the unperturbed wave function is psi n0 x, which is root 2 by a sin n pi x by a. So the first order correction, you know, is the simple and famous formula is this, and that is V naught. So that is also same as the exact result. If you have solved the problem like that exactly, then you would have gotten the same result, and in this case the perturbation is exact, because if you look at the higher order terms, they will vanish with the higher order correction. Now you can check the state corrections. So even though the energy correction is pretty accurate, the state corrections will not be that nice. So that is something you will check. So then the example 3, in which the half of the potential is lifted, again you can solve it very trivially, but even though the answer is not so trivial, is that you will get that, I mean intuitively probably this answer is not easy to guess. So the answer you will get is the energy correction is V naught by 2. Again compare this with the exact, and you will find that this is pretty accurate, but again the wave function is not so accurate. So it is generally true that the first order, it gives you a very good approximation to the energy. That's why it's such a famous formula. But to get a similar accuracy in the wave function, you have to go to one higher order. So that is generally true in perturbation theory, and you will see any examples of that. Okay. So now again do the potential 4 and 5 and notice the difference in the parity of the H1 and see how that affect the correction terms in the energy and wave function. And again, as I said before, check the validity or convergence criteria of the perturbation series. Now consider the tempered floor of a box potential problem, which is a third class of problem, and see, as I discussed, that how can you possibly model this problem 1, which is by thinking it as a Gaussian or semicircle or a small rectangular bump, or you can think another way of tempering the entire floor, which let us say the floor is a cosine function. It is not a flat floor, flat constant, it is a cosine function. So then it turns out that you can again use perturbation theory pretty accurately, but most interestingly, this problem can also be solved exactly. This is a class of problem called, so if you write down the differential equation for this problem, it is called a Matthew function or Matthew equation. There are very huge literature in mathematics to deal with this kind of function, and they also represent a very interesting class of physical problems which one can produce in lab and it leads to a wide range of physical phenomena. But a preliminary form of that is this potential. Okay. So there is another class of problem you can do in which you add a delta function peak at the floor and see how the perturbations work out. And what is interesting, and all the examples discussed so far can be also solved without using perturbation theory. So these are like a benchmark problem. They are not like real problems. This you use to see how good is perturbation theory, or sometimes the real solution is too complicated, but you want a good enough solution, so you use perturbation theory. Okay, now we will move on to a class of problems which does not have an exact solution. So now you are really entering in the regime of perturbation theory, where perturbation theory is not just a optional thing, like that is the only way to proceed unless you want to do the full numerical solution, which is often costly and does not give you an intuitive feel. So let us look at the harmonic oscillator example. So the H naught is simply the harmonic oscillator which we have solved many times, and the perturbation is a x cube function. So if I plot it, it looks like this. It is a function which is like this, the perturbation, and it is not an even function like the original potential, and we will see how that affects the corrections. So this is the problem I want to solve as we discussed before. So H naught is, the H naught solution is simply n plus half h cut omega, and psi n0 is the Hermite polynomial wave functions. Now the first correction is 0, which is obvious, because if we write down the Hermite correction, it is like this Gaussian x cube, which is an odd function, and it is integrated over, it becomes 0. Now what about the second correction or the correction in the wave function? It turns out you need both kind of elements to calculate this. Is basically this kind of term, psi m0 h1 psi m0. Now just by the staring at these functions and their odd even structure, you immediately know that many of them will fall to 0, and that simply because of the odd character x cube or the x to the power odd number character of the potential. What are the things will go to 0? You can just immediately know that when the m is equal to is 2 away from n, is as even integer times away from n, then it is 0. Otherwise it is, sorry, those are the only cases when it is 0, and otherwise it is non-zero. Okay, so now you know immediately that I think there is a typo here. So this is the case when it is non-zero, otherwise it is 0. So whatever the n is, so you have to be, you have to be 2 away from that, and that's when your thing will become non-zero. So let's see if that is true. So psi n0 and psi m0. So if I take it as to be 1 and psi m0 has to be 2, So it is an even function, and h1 itself is an odd function, then the whole thing is odd function. So it is okay. So yeah, so this is the what is written here is correct. So if m is equal to n plus minus 2k, where k is an integer, then it is this is 0. So that we know immediately from steering. So now let's look up into this and see how we can deal with this problem. So let's take, so for example, take this for x cube, take these numbers, which is n plus 3, n plus 1, n minus 1, 1 plus 3, and compute these states, the matrix elements of this. Now I can break it down into this in these two parts, and then it will become, this part will become an odd, even function, this is an odd function. So odd function means the distance between these two can be 1 or odd, and even function means the distance between these has to be even, then only this will be non-zero, otherwise it's 0. So if I expand it, put the resolution of identity in the middle, so these are the only cases where it will contribute to be non-zero. So then we can simply solve this, simply work out these terms, and I can find this number. Now there is another very simple way to solve this kind of problem, is that you write the x in terms of a dagger operator, and then it becomes a plus a dagger cube with some prefactor. You binomial expand it, and then you know simply how it acts, how a and a dagger acts on these n operators, and then you will get the same result. You do the same thing for x cube sandwich between n and n plus 1, x cube sandwich n and n minus 1, and so on. Now these are the only terms which will be non-zero in this expansion. So if I compute the second order correction, and out of all the terms, these are the only non-zero terms as we know, and this will give me the following correction. This will give me the following correction as I have written here, is that minus 15 by 4 h bar omega alpha cube, which times n square plus n plus 11 by 3. And similarly I can compute the correction of the states, which comes from psi n naught and the similar set of terms. So if I write it down explicitly, this is how this will look like, and you can see clearly that only the terms which are, because of the odd character of the perturbation, only the terms which contribute in the correction are of the form n minus 3, n minus 1, n plus 1, n plus 3. If that potential, the correction potential would have been like, the perturbation potential would be even, like x to the power 4 or x to the power 6 or something, then the even terms would have contributed here. Now so as I said that you can solve the same problem using a n dagger operator, which is another simple way to solve, and one can use, even develop a diagrammatic language of solving it, which is I will not cover that, but you can look up in LibOff in section 13.3. Okay, now let's solve this other problem, and so I will not solve explicitly this, because you can apply the same technique, use the a dagger form, the x to the power 4 potential, but I will tell you something about the interesting features of this solution. This is a very famous problem. It was solved, there are many papers written on this, and the interesting feature of this problem is that, so if you expand this and calculate this up to many terms, you will get this kind of a series of in epsilon, and these prefactors are like, looks like some very weird number, but one can work it out. In fact, the first paper which did that in 1969 worked out like hundreds of terms. It was like extremely detailed and thorough paper, and I will suggest you to look at that paper, and also by yourself I suggest you to compute some of this term to convince yourself that where these prefactors are coming from, these weird looking prefactors. Okay, now notice the property of this series. Even though epsilon, epsilon square, epsilon cube, they are like growing in epsilon, the prefactors are getting huge and bigger. They are like huge numbers. So there is something wrong. This series is not cannot converge, or cannot necessarily converge for a given small epsilon, because at some point the prefactor will be so big, then this thing, even though you go further in the series, these terms, the prefactor will cause the whole thing to grow instead of getting smaller and smaller. So that happens. So it turns out this kind of series has a radius of convergence 0, and these are called asymptotic expansion. So you can Google this. This mathematics, they are known as asymptotic expansion. I don't know if I've already done this in the infinite series studies of your mathematics course. But there is nothing to worry about, because such examples are there everywhere in physics, and there are something you can do to use this kind of series reasonably well. So for example, Starling's approximation, which you must have done in the statistical mechanics course or like probability theory, and for a large number how you estimate n factorial as n log n minus n, and there are many other examples in quantum electrodynamics where you encounter this kind of series. So what happens in this kind of, what is the main feature of asymptotic series? It turns out for a given epsilon, the terms keeps getting smaller up to higher order in epsilon up to a certain point, certain order, and after that it starts getting bigger. But you can use the series well, reasonably well, up to that point. After that you cannot use. You can numerically check this fact, and that is basically the property of an asymptotic series. So they are not converging series, but they are practical and useful up to a certain extent, and that's what you can use that. Okay. So now let's work out the first order state correction. This is you can read the details from these references I pointed out on site, the Cohen, Tanuji and Landau. So the first order state correction looks like this. You know the standard formula. Now you know how to, so now we expand it. So there is a form which I would suggest you to work out very quickly. Just expand this binomial expansion, apply A and dagger. So now use this form here. You will get this expression, and this expression you can write it in terms of the A dagger operators. Like you know how to do this. We studied this extensively in the second quantization section, and that is how the first order correction will look like. So this is how you solve this kind of problems, and how you physically think about the solution like that. Okay. The next step is to find the normalization of the state 0 epsilon, which you can simply use. You can simply impose the rule that 0 epsilon bra 0 epsilon ket is equal to 1, and then find out what conditions you need to satisfy in order to do that. So that is something I would like you to try to do that, and then you extend this for because so far you have done the correction on the ground state. Now you look up how to do the correction on the first excited state or second excited state for a perturbation of the form epsilon x to the power 4 by 4 factorial. So the factor 4 factorial was placed because it helps the problem to simplify the problem in certain cases, and the prefactor. So now let's look at some examples of degenerate perturbation theory. The first example is there in is basically a 3D version of the problem you have done, where you put a constant potential in half of the box. Is similar to that. You will put a constant potential in half of each direction, so it becomes a quadrant, and you want to solve that. What is the energy correction and all that. This is a problem which is fully worked out in Griffiths, so I don't want to discuss it here. It's a very simple, and where you just step by step apply the rules of the degenerate perturbation theory, and after that you solve the problems in Griffiths, which is 6.4. 6.9, 6.10 and 6.11. They are pretty straightforward problems. So just solve it, and if you run into trouble, let me know. Then I'll perhaps discuss this. So, but here I will solve another problem where several interesting features are there in this problem. That's why I decided to discuss the solution of this problem. So consider a particle in a box in 2D of length L. Each side is length L, which is a square box. So now apply a delta function potential at location x naught, y naught. So this is how this delta function is. Some delta function is there somewhere, and this is the mathematical form of that delta function potential. So these are perturbation. So what are the unperturbed eigenstates? The unperturbed eigenstates are simply, if I write it in this n and k form, it's psi naught xy is 2 by L sine pi nx by L pi ky by L, and energies are given by this, which is obviously at n equal to 0, k equal to 0 is the ground state, which is unique. and non-degenerate, but fast excited state N1 K2 or N2 K1 is not a degenerate state, is not a is a degenerate state, and they are the fast excited state. So, for ground state you can apply the non-degenerate perturbation theory, but the fast excited state you have to apply degenerate perturbation theory. So, that is the interesting thing about this problem, you can have all the features at the same problem. So, let us do the easy part. The first order correction in the energy in the ground state is this E111, and that can be written in this form. And sorry, I made a mistake by starting to count from 0. I start to count from 1. So, the first is n equal to 1, k equal to 1, that is the ground state. Fast excited state is n equal to 1, k equal to 2, and n equal to 2, k equal to 2, k equal to 1. Second excited state is n equal to 2, k equal to 2. So, that is again a degenerate, a non-degenerate ground state, and then the third state onwards again things are degenerate. So, it is like that. So, let us look at the correction in the first in the ground state. So, that is this the simple formula, apply it, and it is very easy to solve, and you will get this result. Similarly, for second correction order state, you can apply this formula, turn the crank, do some few lines of algebra, and you will get the second order correction also. If you want a nice closed and compact form, you now start to plug in the x naught and y naught, various x naught and y naught, and you can find an expression. Now, similarly, if you want to calculate and then so on, you can calculate the state corrections also in the similar manner. It is pretty straightforward. Now, let us say we want to calculate the corrections in the fast excited state. This is a degenerate state, so we have to use the formalism of degenerate perturbation theory. So, we know what to do, because simply to calculate the correction we have to solve the secular equation, which is go back to the equation 25 of the note, or look it up into the forms in the briefing. So, this is the secular equation, and we solve the determinant to find the fast correction E1 to 1. So, this is the solution you will get E1 to 1. So, what is this matrix element H1 to H1 NM? It is simply the sandwich between N naught and M naught. So, there is a typo, I should have written N naught M naught, because it is a sandwich between the unperturbed state problem, unperturbed states. And similarly, this quantity, the inner product of this is NKLM, is basically of this form, this matrix elements. Now, if we plug these numbers x naught equal to y naught equal to L by 4, it turns out this whole object becomes 2V0. So, if I choose to place my perturbation at the point L by 4, then my corrections are E1 to 0 and 4V0, which is basically, it shows that the degeneracy is now lifted. But clearly that is not necessarily always the case. There can be a situation when there is, even after you solve the first order secular equation or the first order perturbation theory, degenerate perturbation theory, the degeneracy is not lifted, because there are some points in that special points, and to find those special points. So, when the degeneracy is not lifted, this part will vanish. So, if I put this part and impose the condition this must vanish, we will find 9 points where that can happen. So, these are the 9 special points. So, in these 9 points, the first order perturbation theory does not lift the degeneracy. Why? You can think it is some of these points are just symmetric. For example, the center is just symmetric, it has the same symmetry as the square. If you put a perturbation here, if you rotate it or do something, it becomes exactly the same as the original point. But some of these are accidental. So, anyways, there are some points where the degeneracy is not lifted, and you cannot do much about it in first order. So, that is what these special points are. So, now I will go to another problem. I will discuss another problem in Sakurai, which is a little twisty problem, because this problem also the first order perturbation theory, the degeneracy is not lifted, but you can go to the second order perturbation theory to lift the degeneracy. So, here is the problem. So, there is an H naught which has a degeneracy in ground state, which is E1 or like some state, not necessarily ground state, and E2, and there are the 3 states, and then you add a perturbation, Hermitian perturbation, which is of this form. So, what is the energy and state corrections first order and second order of this problem? So we know that let's start with the easy part, which is the E2. So this problem can be solved trivially. They will have 3 eigenstates, which is 1 0 0 0 1 0 and or linear combination of that, and 0 0 1. So now I do the part which is non-degenerate E2 and compute its state correction. Its state correction is simply this. If I write the eigenstate as 1 and 2, because 1 is the linear combination of all the states and 2 is the non-degenerate eigenstate. I plug in, I get the state correction to be 0. So the first order state correction is first order energy correction to the non-degenerate state is 0. Now what is the second order correction? We apply the simple formula of non-degenerate perturbation theory. We know that this phi 2 is the projector which operates on all the states except that state where we were acting it on. You plug it in, you write down the projector form by taking outer product. It becomes this matrix 1 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0. You plug everything and you get this formula, which is simply a number del 2 is a square plus b square by e2 minus e1. That's the first non-zero correction to your energy eigenstate or energy eigenvalue. So now let's go to the degenerate space. Write down the secular equation. We know the secular equation from the equation 25 of my previous lecture, and this q naught operator is again the operator which projects onto the substrate with unperturbed against energy E1, which is the same projection operator as previous. So apply this q naught on this and you will get 0. So this equation will have 0 eigenvalue. So that means this secular, and you can write it as you can think it as a 2-dimensional subspace, and this means even in first order you have the same degeneracy as the problem. So then we have to apply the second, we have to look for the second order correction and see if the degeneracy is lifted. So here is the second order secular equation, which comes from the equation 28 from my previous lecture, and here you can see this is the effective Hamiltonian form. The second order correction in one side, and on the left hand side and right hand side I have the effective Hamiltonian, which is given by the second order correction, which is, so q naught 2 is the projection onto the subspace with unperturbed eigenvalue E1, which is still degenerate after using first order perturbation, and in this case it is basically the whole space of the unperturbed eigenvalue E1. So that means the q naught square is simply q naught in this problem, and the p naught is simply something which you add it with to give identity, and that's this form. So you plug in all the forms of q naught and p naught in this, that is basically this, and after some algebra you will get this. So now you can, this is a secular equation which you can solve, or this is an eigenvalue problem or effective eigenvalue problem. This is the effective Hamiltonian on left hand side, and this is the effective eigenvalue of that Hamiltonian, and if you solve it you will get these two solutions which are not degenerate. So now in the second order the degeneracy is lifted, and now the whole problem has basically a second order degeneracy solution. So the energy is from this part is E1 minus s square plus v square by E2 minus E1 and E1, where the degeneracy is lifted, and then the non-degenerate part you got this previously is E1 plus s square plus v square by E2 minus E1. Now this whole problem is just a 3 by 3 matrix problem. You can solve this whole problem exactly. So solve it exactly and see that if you take the limit of that a and b are smaller than like this object is like a E2 minus E1 is bigger than a square plus b square, expand it and you see that if you get this same result which you got from using this degenerate perturbation theory, second order degenerate perturbation theory. Okay, so now I will suggest you to solve some more examples. So look up into this Sakurai. So the book of Sakurai I have is second edition. So second edition, the problem number 5.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11. I will suggest you to solve this problem. Those are very simple and similar pattern problems. In Griffiths, I will suggest you to solve equation 6. Or problem number 6.34, which is simple harmonic oscillator in 3D plus a perturbation which is of the form lambda x square yz, which is again by the same rule you can solve this problem. And there is another problem which I want which you can try to solve. This is again, so what I am trying to tell you, that the representative class of problems I have discussed, if you have understood and can solve this problem, roughly you can solve any problems in this which you will face in this in any standard let's say textbook or anything, or any exam maybe. So consider this problem, which is an electron in a box which energy, let's say 3 pi square h bar square by ms square, or box of dimension A. It's a 3D box. Now you know obviously this is a degenerate state. You can choose any other degenerate state and ask what are the corrections when you apply an electric field in the z direction. So this electron is charged, so it will couple with an electric field which is of this strength is electron charge times electric field by z cap. So this is an another problem which you can try. And then there is another problem, which is, these are all very experimentally relevant problem. You often create these ion traps or something where you put an electron and you can isolate an electron and or a bunch of electrons which are not interacting with each other. So then you can try to ask that what happens to the energy states of an individual electron, and if you do spectroscopy on this kind of thing, what are the lines you will get, or what are the momentums. If you do a scattering, what are the momentums in your get. That's why you need to estimate this kind of energy. So these are very relevant problems. And a similar relevant problem is a harmonic oscillator with a cutoff, or like a volume effect. Let's say you have a system or trap which is finite in volume. So normally when you do harmonic oscillator, you see the harmonic oscillator is still infinity, but that is not the case in any real problem. You have to put a cutoff there or put a limit. So let's say the harmonic oscillator is there from 0 to A, and after that if the particle goes beyond, after that it becomes a free particle. So because there is no more potential after that, because the potential is created only in this small region. Then how will you solve this problem? So if you treat this as a, how can you treat this problem as a perturbation problem? So these are the class of problems I will suggest you to look up. Now there is another interesting problem which I want to solve you, I want to discuss for you. This is from Griffith 6.35. It's an interesting problem because you have used a lot of time van der Waals equations. So this gives you an idea where this van der Waals force or van der Waals potential comes from. So let's say I have two atoms which are r distance apart. They are electrically neutral, so that means there will be no electronic interaction between them, no electronic attraction or repulsion. But an atom is made of a positive part and negative part. So let's say this is the positive part, which is the nucleus, and the negative part is the electron, and they are coupled by some spring. So there is some distance between them, and so on. So that means the atom is like a, you can think it is like a dipole moment or some kind of a, there is a spatial extent, even though that is very tiny. So if r is too big compared to this distance between plus e and minus e, then of course the atoms will not see anything. But if the r is reasonably not so big, like let's say the atom can, like this plus e minus e and like there is some interaction is still there, because if you think the atom is not just a neutral blob, it is made of a positive and negative part. So let's try to estimate this strength of this interaction. So the crude model of the atom is basically an electron of minus e charge and mass m is coupled to a nucleus which is plus e and a very heavy compared to the electron. We know the nucleus are way more heavy compared to electron. So for that you can assume that this nucleus has no dynamics, it's just a static object, infinitely heavy. This thing is called Born-Oppenheimer approximation. You will see that its importance later, but let's just time being use that without knowing the name. So what is the Hamiltonian? The Hamiltonian will have only the dynamics of the electron, which is half pm square, half p2 square. These are the only momentum terms, because the electron can move, the nucleus cannot move. And then there is half kx1 square and kx2 square. This is also for the relative displacement of the electron from its respective nucleus, and that's again because the nucleus cannot move, they are completely static. So the dynamics will be only decided by the electrons. So what is the Coulomb interaction? The Coulomb interaction will have a first term which is between the nucleus plus e is the first term. The second term is between the electron of one and the nucleus of the other, and the nucleus of the one and electron of the other. So this part will have a will have it for r plus x1. This part will be r plus x1. So let's say this plus e and minus e, and this part is this plus e and minus e will be r minus x2, and so on. And then there is a third part which is between the electron and electron. So that part is basically E square by r x1 minus x2. Okay. So that is basically your full Coulomb interaction potential, which you treat as a perturbation. And see, so let's say the x1 x2 is much smaller than r. So what happens? I can expand this 1 by r minus x, if that is true. X1 x2 is much smaller than r. This is the expansion. I plug this expansion for each term into this in this Coulomb interaction perturbation, and I get this expression after that, which is minus E square x1 x2 1 by 2 pi epsilon naught r naught cube. So that is my perturbation now in the neat form. It's a x1 x2 is basically the form. The good thing is that this problem is again exactly solvable by making separation of variable, like by doing a variable transformation or normal coordinates. So I introduce this new variable which is x plus minus and p minus, which is basically in this variable transformation of x1 x2 and p1 p2, and in terms of this is how the problem now looks like. This is a very simple harmonic oscillator problem with a potential which is dependent on a constant r, which is their distance between the nucleus. Nucleus is static, so that's why the r is constant. So what is the ground state of energy of this problem? It is half h bar omega plus plus omega minus. What are the omega plus and omega minus? We know from here what are they. This is basically this quantity, which you can again expand, because the under the approximation that this k is much larger than the interaction, and that's a valid approximation. If I say this E is a small quantity and r is the distance which is larger, and that implies it's a weak interaction. So if it is weak interaction, you can write it in this form. So what is the total energy of the system in the absence of this interaction? It is just h omega naught, and that is the effective potential or effective correction of the problem in the energy in the of the problem when you switch on this weak interaction. So it is E minus E naught is that correction. So after a little algebra, you get this expression of this effective potential of the problem because of the because of the interaction or effective energy, and that is basically a 1 by r to the power 6 form, which we know, and it is attractive because of its sign is negative, and that we know as the van der Waal potential, or like that is what we use as a, that's why we use this attractive potential 1 by r to the power 6, which comes from the Coulomb interaction of the dipole moment or the positive or negative part of the electron and nucleus interaction. Okay. So now I do this, go to this first order perturbation theory and see if I can get the same result. Again apply the simple straightforward first order perturbation theory. You know, you can write the non-interacting case, you can write it in the simple product form, and they will separate and you will get 0 basically. Similarly, in the second order, you can apply the simple second order perturbation theory formula. You can write the n correction as nn and the nth state as nn and 0 0. You do a little bit of algebra and you will get the same form, which is the van der Waal equation or van der Waal energy correction, and that is what I wanted to just show you as an interesting application of this perturbation theory. Okay, so that's all. So you solve all the problems which we discussed, and then we will be fully have control over this your understanding of this perturbation theory for the simple problems, and the next part of this module I will go on discuss for the central force type problem, which is basically hydrogen atom type problem.